Hello and welcome to an Infinity the Game battle report. Today we're having an Aleph off, playing Operation Subsection against Assault Subsection, and the scenario is Acquisition. Now, the challenge/premise for today's video is provided by channel supporter Zephyr, who made a request for an OSS list in particular to pair with a list that they're already playing. The list that they're already playing is a spin on a classic, something that has been played really since the beginning of N4, using the Asurus Lieutenant as the basis for the list. The Asura Lieutenant is a wonderful nucleus of a list. She is a very useful piece. She has +1 Lieutenant order. She's a very good hacker, and she synergizes beautifully with the pieces that you can easily take around her, where OSS is known for its Dakini fire teams. They're very good, they are a pure fire team, they have mimetism, and because they are remote, they can be buffed by a Probot Evo hacker. And because you're taking an Evo hacker, you can Fairy Dust, and because the Asurus is heavy infantry, you can Fairy Dust her, which means you then have a very powerful hacker with its own firewall, which all of a sudden elevates her to a piece that can potentially do things like walk into enemy repeaters and kill enemy hackers through their own repeaters. And this is a tactic that was actually pioneered as early as the beginning of N4. I remember dealing with and working through this with friends at the time, thinking about how we might deal with and engage what was really the first order optimal strategy of N4 Infinity, which was at the time camouflaged repeater Masai Morans. That didn't last long, thank God. And while the general dialect about that problem and that premise at the time was a lot of complaints that you couldn't use old classic like zero KHDs to just face check enemy networks and try and kill things like interventors, you could do it with a select number of hackers in the game, and the Asura was one of those. And so very early on, she emerged as a strong potential counter to easy info war dominance, and she has stayed that way since. So the Asurus and that combination of the Evo hacker and firewall is one of my favorite things about OSS, but we need a list to pair with it. And so the basic idea there is that we want a list that is not using an Asura because we want something that is different. And so I cast my mind to that. And on the grounds that we aren't using an Asura, we're going to play relatively hacking light, not no hacking, but relatively hacking light. And we're trying out a Marut Lieutenant. Now, one of the things that is notably absent from this list is any chain of command, and that is on the grounds that if I lose the Marut, I've probably lost the game anyway, so chain of command is a little bit superfluous. And in any case, I do still have 2 veterans in the form of the Netrods, and the rest of the list is basically trying to just cram in the maximum possible number of very lean, very flexible attack options and specialists and posthumans while still hitting the 15 trooper cap. So in that vein, Combat Group 1, we have the Marut Strategic Lieutenant. We then have a Motorized Bounty Hunter, just the 9.1, and we have a link that you will see 2 versions of in this list, which is the Dakini with Heavy Machine Gun linked with a Dawon Fire Team option, multi-pistol +1 burst. This is the CC remote added with reinforcements, and a CSU Specialist with rifle and light shotgun, 2 Lamad Rebots, and 2 Netrods just for orders. So this is realistically, this is an 11 order group once you add Strategos in. Then in Combat Group 2, we have a Bounty Hunter again, and then the Dakini Dawon CSU link team. Then we have our post-human proxies. All we can afford in this list is the Hacker Mark II with Infiltration, Mimetism 6 Camouflage, and then an Engineer, Whip 15 Engineer, Whip 15 Hacker. These things are just hugely efficient for their points cost, some of the best pieces in the entire game, and then a Probot Evo Hacker. Of everything in this list, I actually think the Probot is one of the pieces that I might cut. I could really use those points for other things, and buffing just Haris Fire Team Dakinis is serviceable, but I wasn't able to do it this game. I was under pressure the entire game from Steel Phalanx, and a Probot is one of those pieces where you need a little bit of breathing room to set it up, and Dakini are still fragile, so I don't mind a Probot for doing things like buffing a core link Dakini that can't afford to lose a face-to-face roll, but this list can attack in absolute waves. Another thing to note about this list is the fact that it is running very intentionally a 9-6 split, and somewhat annoyingly, I provided this list to Zephyr, and they actually just went and played with it, and they came back and said, "This is great, I love it, you can do all of these things with it, so why am I recording a video? You've got what you need." But I wanted to play it as well. We're here. Zephyr did, donate some money to the channel, asking for a video, and a video is what they will get. But one of the things that they observed is that you can do a lot with Strategos 2 in this list. You can flick Motorized Bounty Hunters back and forth between lists. You can move all of the proxies around in one go. You can change your order pools up. Strategos level 2 is a good ability, and the 9-6 split helps enable it. So I had high hopes for this list. The presence of the Marut also gives you at least some potential for going first in acquisition. So I've got lots of orders, mobile attack pieces. The list is fast, the list is dangerous, the list can hit hard and make that attack that you need if you're going first in acquisition, but then also has a big chunky piece to just sit on the central objective zone, drop into suppressive fire, and hold if you're going first and you haven't put your opponent out of the game by turn 3. Playing against us, we have Aleph again, the terrifying Steel Phalanx, piloted by very competent Steel Phalanx local player Sam. Sam is one of those players where they have a chance to play Infinity like only occasionally, not a ton of reps, but they really make those reps count, and they play Steel Phalanx. They are our Steel Phalanx player. And they recently played at CanCon, for example, and they had to like brush the rust off at CanCon a little bit, but their muscle memory for moving things like links, doing like these execution, knowing how they can allocate force is very strong, and they write quite good lists. This is a list that is a mix of classics and, in particular, one interesting experiment slash choice. So we have there one of the most fearsome links you can build in Steel Phalanx, the combination of Eudoros, Machaon, Phoenix, and Ajax. This is terrifying. It's just creme de la creme. You have Phoenix with the +1 bonus from having a Myrmidian quote unquote core, which means he's BS 14. Like this is just hell on wheels, and it's costed accordingly. 2 Lamed Rebots, 2 Netrods, and a Probot are just there to provide orders for this group, which means that this is a 9 order group, potentially up to 10 using O12 Prestige. In Group 2, things get interesting. Now, Penthesilea is just another outstanding piece, super excellent. Yep. We then have a very efficient Thorakiti, like a do-everything sort of Thorakiti core with Pandora, who is very good and makes those Lameds excellent. And adding hacking, Pandora would prove to be this game one of the most interesting pieces. Not only does she have a pitcher and therefore the ability to, for example, attempt to oblivion my pieces, including my lieutenant, but she makes those Lamed rebots into repeaters that actually project hacking networks. And against my predominantly hackable force, even just her, that would be very, very good. She's also got a Medikit +1 burst, which means that there are multiple sources of paramedic just in the Thorakiti link. Because there's another Thorakiti submachine gun paramedic, we've got a forward observer, and then we have a Mache. Now, the Mache is an interesting piece. It's maybe worth 32 points. This one is carrying a missile launcher and a zapper, but Mache are Mimetism, MSV1, I think they're NCOs as well. So you get quite a bit for what is still ultimately just a single wound piece, but it is an MSV ARO missile launcher piece that in some situations will be very good and would even get active turn firepower use in this game. Now, one of the things about this list that I particularly like is that it is just 14 troopers and it is 4 SWC. Now, some people will be able to, I don't know, plug this into Army or just count cost in their head efficiently enough. But for many players, and this includes me, if I'm just playing in an evening after a long day of work, I am not going to go like full Rain Man and try and figure out the exact cost of an army. I will usually just do an SWC count and just see, how many SWC can I see? How much is left? What does that mean is possible? And so when my opponent deploys 14 troops and notably has 1.5, 2 SWC left, that means I have to be careful. I have to worry about, yes, things like drop troops, but also, hypothetically, a hidden deployment missile launcher. And the fact that this list doesn't have one, but fakes one out, is going to catch plenty of players. It certainly caught me this game. And there might be some very, very good people there who can just be like, no, I can look at this and I can tell you that they can't afford an Agima Marksman. But I had, a freaking 10-hour day at work today. It's been a long day. I think I played well this game, but I am not able to just tell that at a glance. And so I spent the entire game playing around an Agima Marksman that did not exist, and I respect that as a fake out very much. So here is our table. This is Sam's table. I love Sam's table, but looking at it here on camera, by God, it photographs in some weird ways. And that is because this is a tile table. You can see all of those street maps, etc. They are tiles that he lays down. Then he puts all of the buildings on top of them. Visually, it's just far enough from monochrome. If those walls were brown, I would hate this table, but they're not. They're white, which means it's very easy to make out everything that you need to see. You can always see the ladders, you can always see the buildings, while nevertheless having a consistent color scheme. At this distance on camera, I'll walk you through it, but basically what we have here is a relatively narrow table, but with plenty of ways to move around. So we have lots of high ground. There is a path along the lower edge of the table that can potentially go from DZ to DZ, and there are about 4 lanes up through the table. So the first one would carry you up this way, the second one would carry you up this way, and then the other two would take you around the flanks of the table, which you can squeeze through this zone here. So there are 4 good ground level paths up the table, and there are multiple paths. Every building, all of the rooftops are accessible. There are multiple ladders. You can see them sort of, for example, here and here. There are lots of ladders everywhere, so all of the high ground is accessible, which means that basically 100% of the playing surface of this space, or very, very close to, is accessible. There's lots of movement that you can take. There are lots of interesting nooks and crannies to hide models in. And although this is a relatively dense table, it is a very playable table, and there are some long fire lanes. Now, one of my first plans immediately came a cropper here, where Sam won the lieutenant role. I had whip 15, he had whip 14, he won the role. Bomp bomp, he hard snap picked going first. And with Steel Phalanx against me in this scenario, acquisition is a scenario where, yes, all of the scoring is end of game, but you start very close to your opponent potentially. You start, 16-inch deployment zones, which means that the gap between DZs is limited. And because the gap between DZs is limited, you have the option to put the boot in more efficiently than you otherwise would, which makes both first and second turn in acquisition interesting choices. And my opponent adopted the choice of they wanted to attack, they wanted to go first, they wanted to secure an attritional lead and then play from there, which meant that I, playing second, I would have the last shot at objectives, but I would have to endure to do so. Now, I picked this side of the table over here, and the reason why I did that is that we've got some interestingly positioned objectives. This objective is in this sort of like, it's actually on the building here, but is accessible relatively easily from a ladder on this side. This objective is on this rooftop here, but again, accessible. It's very exposed, but it's accessible from ladders on both sides, but it is very exposed. But in the center, in this nook down here, so these 2 buildings are touching along this wall there, it's down here, which means that it is much, much easier to get to this objective, the central objective in acquisition, from this side of the table, and is much harder to get onto it and hold it from Sam's side. So by picking the right side of the table as they're shown here, I put myself in a position where, yes, I would have to endure a Steel Phalanx Alpha Strike, but if I could, I would potentially have at least a somewhat easy run onto objectives at the end of the game. So in terms of deployment, Sam's deployment, his reserve was very obviously Phoenix, and the way that I could tell that Phoenix was the reserve drop was that Phoenix didn't appear in the main deployment, and you don't see Steel Phalanx without Phoenix. He is as close as it gets to an auto include in that army. So his position was relatively telegraphed. We had a 3-person link initially that was then joined by Phoenix over here. We have Uteros here, McKeon here, and then at ground level we have Ajax, and then Phoenix would pop down over here. He would pop down standing, which I would make some use of. We have just various probots and lameds and net rods scattered around all over the place with a bit of a nest of them back here. And then the Thorakidi link team is deployed in this position up here with the Mackay missile launcher. I think it's here, but we'll move forward over the course of the game. Sam is also making some good use of picket probots. So for example, this probot here is keeping an eye down like this lane down here. It can't see particularly far. Its line of sight terminates at this building, but that puts it at a good range flash pulse on anything that might be moving up in this direction, and providing a repeater for anything that might be moving over the rooftop. So that's nicely positioned, and we've got a similar one that's positioned sort of like there's a probot hanging out down here somewhere doing something similar. So a lot of my deployment in return is going to be predicated on putting a distance between myself and the threats. Now, the problem I have there is that there are 2 significant threats to me. The first is this entire link team from God, which I am terrified of, and I don't want to have anything important anywhere near. But otherwise, we have the fact that there is a linked pitcher that is Ballistic Skill 12 hanging out over here in the form of Pandora. And I have a lieutenant that is hackable and can be oblivioned, so I have to respect that. And the way that we have done that is we've deployed kind of primarily in this part of the table, and with the Marut in particular, distance is protecting her significantly. She'd be my reserve drop alongside the posthumans. That's a classic. You basically always want to do that. But what we have is we've deployed so we've got a flash pulse remote on a rooftop here and here. And then otherwise we've got the motorized bounty hunter and the other motorized bounty hunter, they won't roll up anything significant. One of them actually gets a multi-sniper rifle, but it will never come up. The other rolls the ubiquitous grenades. They will deploy down in these nooks here, kind of watching these sort of like these paths into my DZ, but with the intention of pulling out in this direction here and here if they have to. Otherwise, we have our first Dakini Dawon CSU link team sort of deployed in this space here, and then the second one deployed in this space here, partly on the rooftop, ready to guard the approach to our plan for the Marut to go. And then we've put our net rods basically down in these corners. So the net rods aren't being protected, but any attempt to go after the net rods will take a long time and still leave, like the Marut, for example, an entire table away. Finally, we put posthumans down. One of them goes down here in a marker state. Penthesilia, it turns out. So Penthesilia would be deployed down here somewhere. Penthesilia does not have stealth, so I can take spotlight AROs against her. I don't have a missile launcher. That's something that I could have, for example. Instead of the Probot, I could easily put a missile launcher into this list, and it would probably have done more this game than the Probot did, even though I only have I have no pitches and a single Whip 15 hacker. But mostly I wanted to be able to spotlight Penthesilia to make killing her in active turn easier, and she would have to move past this post-human eventually. Otherwise, the Marut went down here, and the Marut here is making maximal use of distance. So there are a few things that are worth noting. The first is that if Pandora just stands up and shoots a pitcher, the furthest that she can get it forward is like maybe around here or here, which will not put it in zone of control of the Marut. She's not able to land one on this rooftop because the ramparts are too high for her to see. So the Marut is safe from a pitcher from Pandora unless she moves considerably further forward. Secondly, by being over here, the Marut is as far as it is humanly possible to be away from this link team over here. I can't be any further away than I am. And although she is in a position where Phoenix can see her, I've deployed in line of sight of Phoenix, we are well outside of 32 inches, which means that the most likely outcome of a fight between them is inconclusive because everyone's taking big penalties. I don't love this. When I initially put her down, I thought that this building here and this building here would block line of sight to Phoenix, but there is a very narrow gap between them. But I elected to keep her in that position anyway because there really wasn't anywhere else that I considered safe. So Sam has won the roll. Sam is going first. I choose to take one order away from each combat group because I make the assessment that Penthesilia, particularly with the orders that can be spent on her, I need to take at least one order away from Penthesilia. But frankly, I also feel like I need to do the same with the Phoenix link, and so I just split the baby in that particular case. I take one order away from each. So the first order of the game, Penthesilia does not impetuous because there is a Dakini HMG way down in this corner that will see her if she gets the zoomies. Yes, so here she is here. If she gets the zoomies around there, she will be seen, and it's only a ballistic skill 11 HMG, but it is burst 2. It would be in good range. She declines to make that impetuous move, which is what I wanted, but what he does instead is he spends an NCO order on the Mackay, which stands up and moves around here, and the missile launcher cleans the Dakini up. It only needs to land one hit. It puts the Dakini unconscious, not dead, and only does one wound, actually, which is quite good, but it puts the Dakini down in the first order of the game, and that frees Penthesilia up to go on a little bit of a rampage. Now, there are a couple of good things here in terms of stalling her out. So firstly, there is another Dakini down here, basically sort of somewhere in this position, and it can see along this line. And this is one of the ways that you defend against pieces like Penthesilia. You have overlapping fields of fire. Neither of these guns, right, these two Dakinis here and here, neither of them are in a position where they are ever going to be exposed to fire from Phoenix sort of on the first turn. But both of them have crisscrossing AROs that Penthesilia would need to move through in order to execute an attack run, for example, on the Marut. And so by doing that, I'm forcing Penthesilia to spend potentially quite a few orders doing things like throwing smoke, and because I took orders away from her, she's not in a position to do that. Now, Sam commits to this attack anyway. She comes around here, she gets smoke down there, she comes around here, she dodges past, but she's beginning to run out of orders, and the second part of my defense here comes into play, which is that this Dakini on this corner here is occupying just enough space that Penthesilia can't get past it. It has to die. So Sam uses the Mackay for that, but the Mackay shares a group with Penthesilia, which means that he tries to use the order to get the shot. He actually does not kill the Dakini, and Penthesilia is effectively stranded at that point. With the Dakini not dead in that order, the Penthesilia does not have enough orders to prosecute the attack, and frankly it was pretty dicey anyway, which really just leaves her kind of stranded in this position here and targeted. That is is pretty much a worst case scenario for Sam, and I think there's a strong argument that, look, he did need to, he needed to whiff like a roll with the Mackay. I even had some dodges that were in play here, so like this CSU, part of the reason why the Dakini survived is that the Mackay was splitting its shots, and it pasted this CSU that had stood up to take shotgun arrows at Penthesilea, but ultimately those were sacrifices I was willing to make. So we had a dead the Maki alone had killed a CSU, it had knocked a Dakini unconscious, but their sacrifice had stalled Penthesilea and left her stranded in about this position here. Now, this is nevertheless a good example of a tactic Sam used that you can use as well, which is that you just deploy a high threat, fast attack piece, a rapid offensive unit, and just support them with a gun. And that puts your opponent in a position where they are forced to choose between allowing the rapid offensive unit to move rapidly and offensively, or put pieces in the way of your guns. And not every list can make that choice easily, and in this case, I had to throw both a Dakini and a CSU into the path of incoming missiles to ensure that Penthesilea didn't make contact with my Marut. That was a worthwhile sacrifice from my end, but it was nevertheless a sacrifice. The rest of the turn is spent by Sam moving the Phoenix link forward, but he does so, he looks for some picks, but there is only so much that he can do. So the objectives that he has this turn are to move forward and posture, but not overextend, to press this button, and then to maybe launch something like an attack up here that could kill this Lamed Rebot and take orders away from the Marut. And he is partially successful in this. He has some bad dice rolls. In fact, Macon fails twice to press this button. But what he does is he pulls most of the link back while he still has the orders. He ends up basically prone in a bunch of these spaces here. And then he leaves Eudoros behind to carry out the attack. So Eudoros gets spotlit, but that's fine. Eudoros goes up and over the top here and takes out the Lamed. And then this is the order that Eudoros gets spotlit. This is one of the things that being stealth does. This is the order that Eudoros gets spotlit. And because he gets spotlit on the very last order of the game, killing the Dakini, he then has the luxury of failing his guts roll and going prone, which is a huge pain for me because I would love to have just shot him 4 times on 21s with the Marut, but that option was denied to me, which meant that he was now on a rooftop, and for all that he was spotlit, he is still Eudoros, and that was a massive pain in my ass. And the decision to basically this link team pulling back, returning to a defensive position, leaving behind just one very, very difficult to kill member, very effectively preserved them for the entire turn, and was an interesting, basically a really interesting split offense defense where Eudoros really couldn't push all this way forward and get this kill and then also come back with the link. So the decision was made to separate them, and this link is still relatively effective at 3 people. Only other thing to note was that, as I mentioned, Phoenix started the turn engaged with the Marut, put 1 wound on the Marut before she ducked out of line of fire. I was happy with that. I didn't want her to take any more wounds. There was always a risk here. Continuous damage was a heavy risk to me, but I had to take it. Marut survived, Phoenix is unwounded, and the Marut has 1 wound. So the terms of the damage I've taken on my first turn, we have 2 remotes that have been put down, 1 here and 1 back here. We have a CSU that is dead, and we have a wound on the Marut, which is 4 wounds to 3 single wound pieces and a tag is right on the edge of a tolerable turn. The challenge, of course, was that the rejoinder, the return offensive, would be difficult. I think this would have changed from a good, like an okay defensive turn to me to a sort of like barely passable one if Machaon had managed to press this button, but frankly every other attack that had been leveraged by the Steel Phalanx this turn worked out, so I'm not going to complain too badly about that. So in terms of the counterattack, I really did have to limit myself this turn to a couple of goals. So the first goal was to reconstitute my forces to the extent that I could. There would be limits here, but I had 2 remotes that were downed and a very good engineer. And the second thing I wanted to do was to just clean off the pieces that were within my reach. So that meant Penthesilea absolutely, Eudoros potentially, and then the Mackay if I could. The Marut would take responsibility for the first 2. So basically the first few orders of the game, the Marut just spools up on Penthesilea and annihilates her. I'm in 0 range band, but she's targeted, 4 dice on 18s, just puts her down immediately. Expected result, but outstanding. But then I had to do like a bunch of squirreling and moving around, and I had to do my repairing at this point. I repaired the Marut back to full health. I repaired the Dakini over here, but then I had to activate it and pull it back because I'm fighting a missile launcher. The Mackay had moved up to this position here. I wanted to move the Marut around to here and engage it, and I could do so, but to do so, I needed to make sure that I was not catching other things in the splash, so I had to pull the Dakini back, etc., etc. There was a bunch of things to do to make sure that that fight was safe. I did have the option of just taking the fight with the Dakini, but the Mackay has Mimetism and MSV. I just have Mimetism. That's kind of a bad trade. It would not be a particularly favorable engagement for me unless I put support war up, and even then it would just be okay. And the Marut was right here. I have this really big, really high power tag gun. I'm just going to use that to kill my enemy's Mimetism ARO piece. And indeed, once I'd moved everything out of the way and the Marut could cleanly move up and take the engagement, first shot, down goes the Mackay as well. Not an unexpected outcome. The real challenge was going after Uteros on a damn roof. Now, there are a couple of things that were in the way of this. The first was I was scared of Anagima Marksman. My read was that if it existed, it was probably going to be somewhere in this part of the table, because Sam historically likes to deploy those supporting this core link, so he can do ARO traps where like Phoenix and Anagima both reveal at the same time. So up here, for example, was a primary location for one. So I didn't want to go too hard on the paint against Uteros and take this fight. What I chose to do was to use the irregular orders on the bikers to make this attack first, and this was probably a mistake. And the reason why I think it was a mistake is that I was underestimating the capabilities of the Dawon tac bots. Now, Uteros is very good in CC, but he's ultimately just a martial artist, and a Dawon has burst bonus in active turn, and has an EM CCW, and it's just very, very solid. And it's in a link. I had a number of options with the Dawon, like Uteros was targeted. I was going after Uteros, just firing submachine guns at point blank range against him out of cover and targeted, and that is a fine attack. But the Dawon potentially had a lot more potential. It was dogged, like it wasn't going to go down in one go to any of his AROs. So I think I should have moved the Dawon that was sitting here up and around and engaged him that way. I didn't, and as a result, I basically lost one bounty hunter and the other one went, it didn't go unconscious, but it got kind of like trapped in this position. It took a lot of orders to put Uteros down with the Dawon, and it might feasibly have taken fewer had so with the bounty hunters, it might have taken fewer had I used the Dawon instead. But the Dawon would prove useful later, and frankly, in active turn, it's mostly going to be firing its multi-pistols even in CC anyway for the extra burst rather than using the EMCCW. So I think it would have been a very viable offensive option, but the bounty hunters, had they been free, would have been able to do things, in particular on the second turn, by dint of being unhackable. Overall, though, this was a good first turn. I recovered, so the post-human that had repaired the Dakini finished off the turn by moving up here and recovering this flash pulse bot, then coming down and hiding. That took a command token not to recover the bot, but to actually just O12 prestige to get her out of line of sight. And so that meant that by the end of this turn, I had 2 of the 3 pieces that I had lost and a wound restored to the Marut, and I had killed 3 relatively expensive pieces, which collectively amounted for, look, frankly, only a percentage of the force the Steel Phalanx list could put out because these guys still existed, but plenty of points, enough orders, etc. It was a broadly successful counterattack. So here at the beginning of turn 2, we can see the Marut has returned to the position that it occupied before because it is still pinning down pieces on this rooftop. We have the unconscious Uteros on this rooftop up here, and we have, now this, what's important to note, this bike is deployed here, but the bike is currently vacant, and the guy riding the bike is hanging off the ladder that leads up to Uteros because that's where it had to end the turn in order to get the kill on Uteros. We can see how the Phalanx 3-person now core has pulled back to here, and from that position they will be launching attacks. So there are basically 2 things that Sam does this turn, and I think both of them, or 2.5, and they're both very solid plays, and they make very good use of his 2 disparate combat groups. So there are only so many orders at play in the first combat group, but this team moves out, and what they do is they do press this button on the way through, so it's now controlled by player 1, and then they continue to push around this direction, and Phoenix very cheekily fires a rocket at the motorcycle, which then splashes up onto the bounty hunter and kills him, killing my second bounty hunter and leaving me with basically no high quality unhackable attack pieces. I have the CSUs. That, however, apart from killing the Lamed again, so 2 casualties caused by this team here, that is about the limit of what they can do alongside pressing the button. So they basically pull back and hunker down in approximately this space here, where frankly my options for going after them are very limited. And they're made more limited by the fact that Pandora becomes the hero of the rest of this turn, and that is no surprise. She's an excellent piece. She does a couple of things. The first thing is that since this model up here, this hacker, is revealed, I should probably have seriously considered recamouflaging it. She just peeks forward into its zone of control and then just oblivions it. And the thing about oblivion on post-human hackers is that it effectively kills them. Isolated is a null state for post-humans. So she's down and out of action. She's not coming back into the fight anytime soon. And then she lays down a picture over here, which isolates a Dakini that I had moved forward to this position. So isolation on a Dakini is tolerable, but it is kind of annoying, and then she drops prone. And the main thing that happens here by doing that is that she's projecting a repeater network out here. The pitcher is projecting a repeater network out here, and then she has other repeaters, including this one over here, which means that I am now forced to try and find a way to attack into a pitcher network. Ultimately, though, we've lost effectively 3 troops this round. One of them was a Lamed, one of them was a motorized bounty hunter, and then one of them was just isolation on a Dakini, and all of those are relatively tolerable. We are still broadly intact. The big challenge for this turn is that I now have to attack into a repeater network, but we will make that work. And so I spend a bit of time thinking about how I can do this, and kind of wishing that I had like motorized bounty hunters left. But the decision that I come to is that this Dawon Link team in the center is my best chance of doing things. The challenge that Dawon Link team has is it's in the 5-order combat group 2. But not to worry, we have a solve for that. I don't think that Marut is going to be active this turn. She's basically done her job. She's killed, 2 things already, and the main thing she's doing is forcing Phoenix to keep his head the hell down, so I can actually move unimpeded on the table. I am playing Pano tactics for this game. And so she just yeets herself using Strategos 2 into Combat Group 2. She brings 2 orders with her because she's a Strategos, which means I now have 7 orders to fuel my Dawon Link team rather than 5. Good job, Marut. So we launch a concentrated attack this turn up this part of the table up here and here, and the way is led by this Dawon CSU and Dakini Link. So they move up and around this way. The Dakini takes this fight here and puts down the Flash Pulse remote. That's a surprisingly close fight. It's not a good range band, but Burst 5 is on my side. And then the Dawon comes around and it makes its dodge. I think it needs 13 to dodge, but it moves 4 inches on a dodge. And the dodge carries it forward far enough that it can then launch an attack up on this rooftop against Pandora without getting hacked. So she does respond with an Oblivion because that will turn me off. My ECM kicks in at that point, and I just pistol her 4 times in the face. Pandora, I believe, is not shock immune, and she goes down. And killing her, thanks to this attack, sort of this little path up and around here, killing her puts this repeater out of commission because she was my opponent's only hacker. So all of our remaining orders, Combat Group 1 and Combat Group 2, are then spent. So the second Dawon that was hanging out back here, it runs forward. This group continues to attack, and it's the Dawon that does the Dawons that do the bulk of the remaining work. So the first one is able to put down a Netrod that's hanging out down here, and then as its last order, come around into CC and kill this Thorakiti. And then the second Thorakiti has dodged around to here to try and pin me down. So the second Dawon comes up here, up and over here, and then it engages in the same way with its multi-pistols, and it puts this Thorakiti down. So that has really cleaned out basically this entire flank. We've killed a Lamed, we've killed a Netrod, we've killed Pandora, and we've killed 2 Thorakitis, and the Mackay was dead from the turn before, which is a great deal of damage, and in particular it has removed Combat Group 2 from the Steel Phalanx army, and it's even managed to take 2 orders away from Phoenix's Link team by killing the Lamed and the Netrod. And this has broadly put me in a position where I am ultimately still behind on scenario because, this button has been pressed and we're otherwise just busily murdering each other. But the order pools that remain for Phalanx to spend are getting a little bit thin. And so Sam and I spend a little bit of time mapping out his turn and what he can do, and I make some suggestions, and he ultimately settles on a big play to attempt to win the game. Now, it has to basically all go approximately right, but this Link team, which is now positioned over here, And we can see sort of some of the casualties that have taken place. We can see my models in Sam's deployment zone. This link team over here is going to move out, and they're going to do two things. The first thing is that Phoenix is going to come back over here, and he is going to end up standing in this on this objective, scoring it. And then Machaon and Ajax are going to move up and around this way. Now, the reason why we're doing this with Machaon and Ajax is that where they're going, they don't need Phoenix, and Phoenix is probably the best piece to leave back here. He can potentially even stay standing, although I think in this case he will. No, he will stay standing. So that leaves Ajax and Machaon as a duo, and Machaon is along for the ride here because he has the Eclipse Smoke. Now, along the way, they put down this posthuman, but importantly, she crits one dodge to survive, and so they have to go in after her, and it's Ajax eventually that comes down and kills her, puts her straight in the ground, actually just firing burst 5 with his combis, but that one order is going to matter, because then Machaon has to move up and around here, and there are no forces left in this area really to stop them, and the goal is we have a Marut in suppressive fire, that's what she used her attack aware for, is to get Ajax to this position here and then into CC. And the one extra order that it took to kill this posthuman meant that ultimately Ajax did get into CC, but he got into CC just on the one Berserk. And the combination of basically how the orders had to play out meant that the Marut could suppressive fire him as he got in, and basically through a combination of fire, Ajax would go down, but he would do 2 wounds to the Marut. So at that point, we have a single order left. We have a single lieutenant order on Machaon, who rounds the corner against the Marut. Suppressive fire has been cancelled because she's entered close combat, and he fires with his combi. She just responds with a ballistic skill attack, I want to say, because she's doing that on not 12, she's doing that on 9s. So I think I dodge in response to that because it's just a slightly better chance. 3 combi rounds, 1 connects, but I pass the save, and so the Marut is alive on 1 wound. Now, I was not necessarily out of the game if I was in loss of lieutenant, but this turn is much easier to execute having access to my full order pool. Remember, I've got two command tokens left at this point, and I have 2 net rods who are veterans. So I had a clear. I actually knew what it is I would do if she had died, but not dying makes things easier. The first thing she does is she moves out. She's already out of cover against Machaon, so I take that face-to-face roll. He actually kills me, so Machaon does down the Marut. She's unconscious at the end of this round, but it doesn't matter. It's the last round of the game. She has done her work. It would have been easier if I could have used her to engage and destroy Phoenix, but it's fine. We will do this the hard way. So the hard way is this isolated Dakini continues his journey. He climbs up here and he gets into contact with this objective behind this building. Cool, that's 2 points secured. And then this combat group 1 Dawon moves along here and then jumps off the roof to avoid Phoenix's line of sight, moves to here and then dodges around into, so he moves up just out of line of sight of Phoenix, who will remember is sitting here at this point, and then the dodge move gets him into contact with the central objective, which secures me the game. Now, there's no point making a play to try and kill Phoenix at this point because it would not secure me any additional tournament points. We have one play to try and do our classified, which frankly at this point is secure HVT. My HVT is down here. The HVT of Sam is down here, and Phoenix is just far away enough that he's not zone of control of my HVT. So this link team, the Combat Group 2 link team up here, basically just makes a Banzai heroic charge. They're able to avoid some of Phoenix's templates, but basically what we do is Phoenix, 2 of them will die to a template, and as part of a move that gets the Dakini actually into Phoenix's back arc, and at that point I can run around here and secure the HVT, just ollie Oxenfree, stop moving, and that gives us our classified as well. So at the end of the game, Sam is on this objective, which gives him 3 points for this one. I have not pressed this button, but I'm controlling it, which is 1 or 2, and I'm controlling the center one, which is 3, and I've done my classified via secure the HVT, which gives me that puts me on 5 or 6 points. I want to say that puts me on 6. I think it's 2 points for controlling the objectives. So a 6-3 win to Operation Subsection in a very closely contested, tight game in this list basically built around jamming as much offense and as many specialists at low cost into a list with a Marut as we can. As always, I hope you enjoyed this. If you like what I'm doing, you can support the channel via the Buy Me a Coffee link in the video description below, or by becoming a channel member. Big thanks to the channel members that have supported this channel already. I will be here in future for future battle reports. In fact, the next challenge that I have to take on is to try and play Kapu Kalki, who are a faction that I rated very, very low in the recent Infinity War Faction 2024 tier list, and someone has asked me how I would approach them. So I have had to turn my mind to that, and It's pretty scuffed, but I'm going to do my best. Frankly, they are turning out a little bit like bad Druze, and by God, that is an indictment of the faction. But there are a couple of edges that they have and things that they can do, which, yes, are a bit scuffed, but we're going to give them a crack. I also want to play Torchlight. I have an upcoming event in a few days at a local game store that I may take Torchlight to, or I may try and get permission to split the day and play like one game of QK and two of Torchlight. It's a casual day. That may be all right. We'll see how it goes. As always, I hope you enjoyed this, and I will see you next time.